Hey, what's up, guys? Gonz here for the Face Like the Sun channel. I just want to make a quick video here telling you all about this patent that was filed by Visa. Yes, the Visa that everybody knows about with the credit cards and everything else. They filed a patent back in November of 2019, although this right here says 2018. I'm wondering if that's a typo. But in any case, the abstract here says that the patent is for a digital fiat currency. Techniques are disclosed which include receiving by a central entity computer a request for digital currency. Now, there are many things here. I see a lot of comments in the video I just made public called "Is the Dollar About to Crypto?" I actually recorded this video back in March of 2020 and I made it available for patrons, and I just made it public yesterday. But I see a lot of comments in there that I don't think people are really understanding the difference between centralized versus decentralized cryptocurrencies. And the reason why a company like Visa is trying to create a central entity computer-based digital currency or digital dollar, and one that is built using blockchain. Now, blockchain itself is just a ledger, and it's just a way to secure information. It's nothing more than that. If you use a decentralized system with a blockchain, you have a lot more security and you have more sovereignty in terms of a government or some kind of institution cannot control all that information. Well, it says right here in the abstract that they are creating a central entity computer, which means that this is centralized. This is not good. This is not the same as something like Bitcoin or Litecoin or all these other coins out there in the cryptocurrency world, where it's open source and people have developed it over the years openly and with consensus of the entire community of people working on it. It's very different from that because this is basically a system that they want to use as gatekeeping the digital dollar so they can track the digital dollar much, much better. So every dollar you spend, they will be able to track with more efficiency and just more control. They're always wanting more control. Now, the other part of this abstract here in this patent says, the central entity computer causes removal of the physical currency from circulation in a fiat currency system. So the reason why that's really important is because, again, it mentions the central entity computer. Very different from something like Bitcoin that has tens of thousands of computers around the world, independent from one another, all verifying transactions, holding everybody accountable. Think of the three branches of government. It's meant to hold each other accountable. Not one entity can come in and control everybody. You have three branches. In theory, I know that it hasn't worked out exactly, and a lot of corruption and everything is involved, but there is a process to pass laws and everything else. It doesn't just happen because one person decides. That is similar to the idea of a decentralized system, as opposed to a centralized system who can play gatekeeper, who can basically play king. And this is what this patent is trying to do. And it's trying to remove physical currency from circulation in a fiat currency system. Now, fiat, remember, means decreed. Okay, so the government decrees money and says, okay, a dollar is worth a dollar. It doesn't matter what it's backed by. It doesn't matter if it's backed by nothing. Like our US dollar is, you have to abide by the rule that a dollar is a dollar. And in that way, the dollar itself is already basically the beast system. It's the world reserve currency, so it's already kind of like the one world currency. But again, it's controlled by a central entity. And this digital form with the blockchain is basically trying to use buzzwords like the blockchain. There's no need for a blockchain for a central entity computer because it's centralized. The data is behind a gatekeeper. It's behind one central authority. So I really don't know how else to explain it to a lot of you guys out there that don't get it. It's really a simple thing, the difference between centralized and decentralized cryptocurrencies. And I'm not saying that cryptocurrencies are the end-all be-all. It's a tool, okay? It's almost like a life raft as the traditional systems fall apart. And the reason why companies like Visa are doing this is because they see the end of the current fiat system. And of course, it's always been planned to tear it down and to build something up different. But in that process of building something up different, we, the people, have an opportunity to take back a little bit of sovereignty. And that's what the whole idea of precious metals like gold and silver. But also, if you're just talking about digital things, then something like Bitcoin and Litecoin And Ethereum, well, maybe not Ethereum, because I was going to say that this patent explains how they're going to build this system on Ethereum. But in any case, the decentralized cryptocurrencies is really, I think it's going to be the last bastion of any kind of sovereignty or freedom before they really start to lock down everything behind centralized authorities. So if you're unfamiliar with this stuff, start learning about it and just understand that there's a difference between centralized and decentralized systems. Now, again, I'm not saying that cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin is the end-all be-all. It's not. The scriptures are clear about money being a tool, something that is not to be worshipped or loved, especially over the love of God and the love of your neighbor. Matthew 6:20 talks about storing up your treasures in heaven. Ecclesiastes 5:10 in the Berean Study Bible translation says, "He who loves money is never satisfied by money, and he who loves wealth is never satisfied by income. This too is futile." So a lot of this is futile. I get it. And of course, Matthew 6:24, "No one is able to serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and he will love the other, or he will be devoted to one and he will despise the other. You are not able to serve God and mammon." And so what I'm trying to tell you, everybody here on this channel, and everybody watching out there, I don't love money. In fact, I kind of hate money. I think money itself, from the beginning, is controlled. But much like politics, right? You have to choose what you're going to use. And of course, if you really wanted to stay off the system and off the grid, you can use gold and silver, although you may not be able to buy all the things you need to buy with gold and silver. And also, food, ammo, those types of things are currency if you really think about it. Those things you should store up on as well, but not because you're trying to become wealthy or rich or anything like that, but because you're trying to basically be good stewards and protect your family and everything else. However, it's my guess that most people out there have a bank account. Most people out there probably have a PayPal account or some kind of digital money account. And that digital account right now, that digital money is debt and credit. It's not actually fiat. And this is why Visa is filing for this patent for a fiat digital currency or digital dollar. Now, in the description here, it talks about a whole bunch of stuff. On 0004, it says cryptocurrency systems have advantages over fiat currency systems. For example, cryptocurrency money transfers can be faster than conventional fiat currency money transfers. Lastly, because some cryptocurrencies use blockchains, such cryptocurrencies are often trusted since blockchains are immutable records of transactions. That's all it is. Blockchains are immutable records of transactions, which means once you have a transaction, you can't reverse it. Okay? And so there's an appeal there to that system of like, hey, once a transaction's recorded, you can't reverse it. Now, the good thing about that, from the positive side, is people can't mess with it. Oh, I messed up. Let me just reverse that transaction. You can't do that. The other party will have to send money back the other way. Whereas with credit cards, if you use your credit card right now, you pay for it and it looks like the money comes out right away, but technically it's just credit. And it actually takes, I think, up to 30 or maybe even 60 days for that money to actually clear. So the system right now is broken and heavily, heavily controlled. And on the next one, it says, while cryptocurrencies have advantages, they're generally not subject to regulation like fiat currencies. Further, it is not practical for governments to wholly convert their fiat currency systems entirely to cryptocurrencies, since cryptocurrencies require the use of electronic devices. Some segment of the population of a country may not have electronic devices, so a complete conversion of fiat currencies to cryptocurrencies is not practical. And that's really interesting as well, because yes, it's true that you need electronic systems to access your currencies, your cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin or Ethereum or Litecoin. But in that access point, if you know your private keys and if you've memorized them and if you keep it safe, then you are the only one that can access those cryptocurrencies and make transactions with it. With a company like Visa, with any kind of bank, those are the ones that are gatekeepers allowing you to access your money. So the reason why these banks and central banks and everybody is trying to create these blockchain-based digital fiat systems right now is because they are afraid of losing power. Okay, now, of course, there's a greater system going on here with electronics and the internet and everything else. I get that. But in the immediate here, the idea of Bitcoin, Litecoin, Ethereum, and all these cryptocurrencies is the fact that the traditional systems are not needed anymore. And they're afraid of losing power. And so you have a choice. You can control your own digital money, or you can trust the central authorities like Visa and your banks to control it for you. And if they say, oh, sorry, you can't access your bank account, well, tough luck. And if they say, hey, we need to place this brand or this logo on your hand or your forehead or microchip vaccine, whatever, that's another element of it. And it's much closer, I think, to the current system with the Mark of the Beast type of infrastructure than anything else. But one thing that everybody misses with the Mark of the Beast prophecies and Revelation 13 and everything else is the fact that worship is the main point. Worship of the beast is the main component, not the buying and selling and the mark. Those are things that come afterwards or as part of the worship of the beast. So I know everyone's freaking out about the vaccines and the quantum dots and the Luciferese, and those things are all there. The Microsoft patent, the HR 6666, all of it, okay? And we've covered all those things on this channel, but in reality, I think those are just ways to try to scare everybody. Because if you really look at the prophecy, it's about worship. It's not about the buying and selling, it's about worship. And I'm working on a longer mini documentary on the Mark of the Beast to really break it down, to really drive home that point. That you're going to really have to understand that the Mark of the Beast is surrounding worshiping the beast and a false prophet that points everybody to worship the beast and lots of supernatural things going on in the process. In number 32 here, it says a central entity may refer to an entity that regulates something. A central entity may be a central bank, which regulates a monetary supply. Okay, so think about this. With gold, there's a limited supply, right? There's only so much gold in the world. And there's only so much gold that can be mined. And so that's why there's a limited supply that was not really established by anyone other than maybe God. Whereas with the current monetary system, the central bank can tell you how much supply it has. And they've recently announced that it's going to be infinite, that they're going to print to infinity. So you be the judge. What do you think is going to happen to money, the dollar, if the supply keeps going up? Our dollar has already lost tremendous amount of purchasing power and value. It's only going to get worse. And there's words like hyperinflation. There's things like modern monetary theory that are really at play here. But that's the thing. You have this choice between modern monetary theory, which is bow down to the government. The government says $1 is worth $1, so it'll always be worth $1, despite the fact that we're being flooded with multiple trillions and trillions of dollars into the system, devaluing each unit of $1 less and less and less. And that's why when things get more expensive, it's not actually going up in value. Your dollar is just worth less and less and less. So you got to change your mindset here. People think that, oh, more dollars is better. Oh, this is so expensive. It's gotten so expensive. No, it just means your dollar doesn't go as far as it does before. And it says right here, number 35, fiat currency is currency that is a currency without intrinsic value that has been established as money, often by government regulation. They tell you in this patent exactly what fiat currency is. They know that their money that they're issued, the dollars that are sitting in your bank account right now, ultimately is just there because the government says it is and because they say that there's value with it. There's no intrinsic value in the dollar. So keep that in mind. Number 37, a cryptocurrency network may include one or more computers, usually way more than one. I don't know why they say one. They say one because they want to include that centralized system. One or more computers that participate in maintaining a cryptocurrency ledger. In some cryptocurrency networks, the distributed cryptocurrency ledger may comprise a blockchain. Examples of a cryptocurrency network may include networks of computers that manage any suitable cryptocurrency, including, but not limited to, Bitcoin, Litecoin, Ethereum, Zcash, Dash, Ripple, and Monero. These are all cryptocurrencies, and it's interesting that they would include Zcash, Dash, and Monero in this because those three are considered privacy coins, and you can't really trace all the transactions, especially Monero. Now it gets into a digital wallet, and I want to keep this video short, so I'm not going to really go too far into this, and I got through all of this stuff here, and basically what I'm discovering is that I think they're building this system on Ethereum. 135, in some embodiments, Ethereum may be used to implement various aspects described herein. Ethereum is a blockchain framework implementation. Ethereum is an open source platform and is described in detail in Ethereum, a secure, decentralized, generalized transaction ledger by Dr. Gavin Wood at ethereum.org. And number 136, in some embodiments, digital fiat currency may be implemented using Ethereum, as illustrated in this figure that we'll look at in a second here. And so it's very interesting that they're using Ethereum as the main system to build this on. And so Bitcoin itself, people are saying it's a store of value, and it has definitely performed well in terms of dollar denomination in the last, I don't know, couple months since the big crash. So I can go on and on here, but I want to keep this very short because the main point of this is really the the dead giveaway here of who's behind something like this Visa-based digital dollar. And as you can tell, you have this whole chart here of how this system is supposed to work, and you have the blockchain in the back end, you have the middleware with validating entities, you have the front end with users and asset owners and transactions and everything else. But then above that, you have your ATMs, you have your governments, and then you have your architects. And in that architect diagram here with the 4 cylinders, you have the square and compass. And it says architect underneath. And if you guys are familiar with this channel, if you guys are familiar with the Freemasons, the square and compass is distinctly a logo for the Freemasons, the as above, so below system, and it also is the X of the mark. And I'll get into all that stuff in the video of the Mark of the Beast that I'm putting together a little bit longer. It's going to take a while because I'm writing it and I'm trying to actually produce a video. And so there you have it. Visa applies for digital dollar blockchain patent. And the whole thing is just one big way to try to maintain power and authority while the people, you and I, can decide to transact in Bitcoin or something else, gold, silver, food, bullets, whatever it is. And the central governments can't do anything. And the central banks can't do anything. But they want to get in the middle of that. They want to make sure that they can track everybody, even though everybody is going to move away from these systems that require them. Okay, so that's the big revolution with Bitcoin, is the fact that you don't need these entities to really operate. And that's why projects like the Celsius Network are out there to try to help people unbank themselves and become basically your own bank. And I know that sounds very Mark of the Beastie, but again, there's a big component here that's still missing, and that's the worship of the beast. Again, I don't love money. I really don't. I wish money was not really the way it is, but it is the big control mechanism here. And we have an ability to use these tools like cryptocurrencies, or truly decentralized cryptocurrencies, not government-issued cryptocurrencies, and take back a little bit of that freedom, a little bit more of that responsibility of our own money. And that's all it is. That's all this is, and that's all my message has been on this channel regarding cryptocurrencies. It's not to get rich, or it's not, some of that may be the symptoms or the effects of this system as the dollar goes down and assets like Bitcoin go up, because you see, major stock trader people coming out and saying they're going into Bitcoin a little bit, and big hedge funds and stuff. All these institutions are starting to get into the crypto space because they see that the people are already there. The people that get it are already there, and they want to be able to track everybody. And so it's up to you to manage your systems. And that's really the message here. I want to keep it short. I know there's a lot of different opinions about this, but I'm trying to say that this is more like a life raft for the time being. In the long term, it's not going to solve anything. In the long term, it may turn out to be the Mark of the Beast infrastructure. But again, I am saying right now that the current system, the way it's set up, is much closer to the Mark of the Beast than it is with some kind of cryptocurrency, especially because I don't need a mark on my hand or the forehead to access my Bitcoin. I don't. But I need to bow down to Visa. I need to bow down to my bank to access the money that's in the bank account. So I just hope and pray that you guys think about this, think clearly about this, and try to learn about it, because it is different. It's very different. But as we go along here and as things start to unfold, we need to be as wise as serpents and as gentle as doves, meaning we need to understand what the enemy is doing and understand how it's being implemented, but also be gentle as doves in that we're not going to use these systems to hurt one another. We're going to use these systems to glorify God. And as difficult as that might sound, it's something that we need to think about as we move forward here. So I know I have a lot more to say about this. I know you have a lot of opinions about this, but I'm going to keep it short. I'm going to keep it to the point. And we'll definitely get back to more of these conversations, because I know everybody is curious about these issues. But again, something like Celsius Network is here to help you out. And I'll make maybe a tutorial or something for those of you who are new to all of this. But in effect, the guy who created Celsius Network is the same guy who destroyed the phone industries in the 90s with VoIP, voice over IP, things like Skype, things like Zoom, that technology. The guy who made that technology is now creating something that's going to basically destroy the banks. And so all I'm saying is it's a life raft in a way. You know, if your bank accounts start draining your money out or they lock you out of your account, you're not going to have access to that money. And so it's up to you to learn how to preserve it, but also figuring out what you need in order to survive in the physical sense. Of course, prepare spiritually first, but then if you're talking about the physical, do what you got to do to use your money, this digital money, for the things you need, whether it be shelter, clothes, food, water, ammunition, all those things, maybe land. And that's another tough one. Land is really important. Land is probably more valuable than any of this stuff. But of course, every inch of land is pretty much controlled by the governments. So really pray on it, think about it, but be open-minded about some of these issues and learn about them, because there is a good and a bad approach to cryptocurrencies. And all the stuff happening with Visa and the governments and the central banks, that's the bad version of the cryptocurrency. This is the way more controlled version. And it's not going to be good. It's going to be a power grab by them to maintain their power, as opposed to allowing the power to go back into the hands of the people. So all that being said, thank you guys for watching this video. Try to keep it as short as possible, but I tend to go on and rant and just talk about these things because there's a lot on my mind with this stuff and there's a lot of research being done, and I just wanted to get to it. Let me know your thoughts in the description section. Please share this video. YouTube is really throttling my views, so hopefully you guys can pick this up on BitChute. And I'm working on getting a library.tv account going. And let me know any other platforms that you think is worthwhile. Right now, I know that it's just a matter of time before every one of these YouTube channels gets shut down. So I'll keep doing it as long as I can, but I'm also trying to figure out ways to get off of it and figure out ways to continue to share the gospel in context with all these other issues. So thank you guys for watching. Have an awesome day. God bless.
The modern globalist crime syndicate and the financial oligarchy that operates and controls the illegal drug trade has its origins in the early 18th century via the British East India Company, or BEIC, one of the most evil entities to have ever left its mark on the world. The BEIC was the vehicle in which London trafficked drugs to China and around the world. Through the Grand Lodge of England, the BEIC set up Masonic lodges in India around the same time they set up lodges in pre-revolutionary America. The first Masonic lodge in India, created in the year 1729, was in fact called Lodge East India Arms No. 72 and carried the BEIC coat of arms. During the next several decades, Masonic lodges were strategically set up at trading sites in India and China to more easily transport opium. By the early 18th century, China became the first drug market for London. The Chinese emperor, outraged that his population became doped-up buffoons after decades of opium addiction, attempted to eliminate the opium trade altogether, at first issuing out edicts and prohibitions, then even penalties of death by strangulation. It was all to no avail. As this famous cartoon from the year 1839 illustrates, the British doped the Chinese into oblivion, ultimately sapping the country of its vitality and decimating its army during the two 19th century opium wars. Out of the two opium wars, the Hong Kong Shanghai Bank Corporation, better known as HSBC, was formed in the year 1865. Opium traders operating through the British East India Company became the founding members of HSBC. HSBC became the clearinghouse for all financial transactions relating to the black market in opium and its heroin derivative, and became the central hub for drug trafficking. With the headquarters now located in London, the HSBC currently prints 75% of Hong Kong's currency. British Freemason Cecil Rhodes Standard Chartered Bank prints the rest. With the advent of HSBC, the British East India Company was no longer needed, as the bank became a more effective way of handling dirty money. The BEIC dissolved just 7 years after the foundation of HSBC. Fast forward to December of 2012. just 3 days before Sandy Hook. Eric Holder, Loretta Lynch, and the Department of Justice were forced to address a major money laundering scheme that centered on none other than HSBC.
On Monday, Congress released a report showing that the Department of Justice decided not to prosecute the massive British bank HSBC, based almost entirely on warnings from Chancellor George Osborne and the British Financial Services Authority, or FSA. The report included letters and emails from the UK financial heavyweights saying that a global disaster would result if the financial giant was prosecuted. The Department of Justice took notice of their claims, and Eric Holder, urged by the Treasury Secretary and Fed Chair, withdrew the department's lawsuit. However, Congress said that Holder misled Congress about why the lawsuit was withdrawn, and that there was more than enough evidence to prosecute the bank for allowing criminals and terrorists to launder money through the bank.
Through the Swiss leaks, HSBC was caught laundering money to Mexican drug cartels and terrorist groups. Terrorist groups, mind you, that were in fact created by Western intelligence, such as Hamas, ISIS, and Al-Qaeda. The Western world's continuation of spreading bloody democracies and coups d'etats throughout the world hinges on the existence of terrorist groups who antagonize existing governments, hence the need for a first world savior. HSBC ensures that the sinister agenda proceeds. As Shelley Casley from Great Game India points out, for years when banks have been caught laundering drug money, they have claimed that they did not know, that they were but victims of sneaky drug dealers and a few corrupt employees. Nothing could be further from the truth. The truth is, a considerable portion of the global banking system is explicitly dedicated to handling the enormous volume of cash produced daily by dope traffickers. Contrary to popular opinion, it is not demand from the world's population which creates the mind-destroying drug trade. Rather, it is the world financial oligarchy looking for massive profits and the destruction of the minds of the population it is determined to dominate, which organize the drug trade. The case of HSBC Bank underscores that point. Serving as the central bank of this global apparatus is HSBC Bank. HSBC admitted their guilt of laundering money to cartels and terrorists, yet for such a malicious crime, HSBC was issued a mere slap on the wrist, and outrageously, no one was ever prosecuted. They consider themselves untouchable. The following is the hidden history of how Freemasonry helped establish the global drug trade and the financial oligarchy that controls it to this day. The relationship between Freemasonry and the British East India Company proved to be the mechanism in which the opium trade would be possible. Thus was established the beginning of the Masonic network and the illegal drug trade. The opium trade was set up through a triangular trade system between the British, India, and China during the 18th century. According to the Encyclopedia Britannica, Britain undertook the opium trade because of their chronic trade imbalance with China. There was a tremendous demand in Europe for Chinese tea and silks, but there was correspondingly little demand in China for Europe's manufactured goods and other trade items. The opium trade, which created a steady demand among Chinese addicts imported by the West, solved this chronic trade imbalance. In India, farmers produced the largest opium crop in the world. There were 3 main British stations for trade in India: Bengal, Madras, and Bombay. At least one Masonic lodge was strategically positioned at each site. Lodge number 222 was established in Bengal in 1740. A Madras lodge was established in 1752, as was the Provincial Grand Lodge of Madras. In 1758, Lodge number 234 was established in Bombay. From the 18th century to the 19th century, the British Masonic network grew tenfold in India. During the 1750s, the British East India Company took full control over opium growing districts in India. Journalist Simon Deschamps explains, quote, "Masonry became so entrenched in trading that provincial Masonic lodges eventually resorted to bills of exchange as a means to convey the members' fees to the Grand Lodge of England from 1772 onward. Bills of exchange were the traditional means of payment for most trading transactions, unquote. So how did these Masonic networks function? According to Builders of Empire by Jessica Harlan Jacobs, Masons gave out Masonic certificates which worked much like a foreign passport. Thus, through his certificate, a Mason can effectively travel the Masonic network wherever a lodge exists. Writing in the year 1867 under the auspices of a Grand Masonic Lodge, one Mason arrogantly explains how the Masonic network works. Quote, "Not only do we know no north, no south, no east, and no west, but we know no government save our own. To every government save that of Masonry, and to each and all alike, we are foreigners. And this form of government is neither pontifical, autocratic, monarchical, republican, democratic, nor despotic. It is a government per se, and that government is Masonic. We are a nation of men only bound to each other by Masonic ties as citizens of the world. And that world is the world of Masonry. Brethren to each other all the world over, foreigners to all the world beside." British Masonic lodges were established in India well into the 19th century to further British trading ambitions. Eastern Star Lodge No. 95 was opened in 1802 in the interest of the Honorable East India Company's Navy. As Deschamps continues, "Soon the Masons in India became adept at channeling information back to the motherland, acting as news dispatchers." Deschamps continues, "The merchants of the East India Company could count on Masonic membership to facilitate their economic and social integration at home and in India, wherever their trading adventures took them." Unquote. Masonically controlled opium trading ventures would extend all the way to pre- and post-revolutionary America. Now recall that the British planted lodges in India at the same time the British planted lodges in America. America soon found itself wrapped in British East India Company's trading scheme. And here's how. The BEIC received tea, spices, and silks from China in return for fabrics manufactured from cotton grown on the southern plantations in the newly colonized Americas. As ships sailed on the return from China, they dropped anchor off the coast of Africa to board captured blacks who they would sell as slaves to work the cotton fields on the east coast of America. One such British slave trader was Thomas Walker, ancestor of Skull and Bones initiate George Herbert Walker Bush and the Bush family, a family heavily tied to the modern opium and drug trade through such atrocities as the Iran-Contra affair and the Afghanistan War, so much so that Bush Sr. was nicknamed Poppy, most likely not for his fatherish figure, but for his role in the black market drug trade. Between 1784 and 1792, the Bush family ancestor Thomas Walker was involved in at least 11 slave trading voyages, taking African captives from Sierra Leone to the British West Indies and to the United States. In 1797, his own crew finally had enough of his antics and murdered him at sea in a mutiny. From the authors of Dope Inc., quote, "Opium was the final stage in the demand cycle for British finance and slave-produced cotton. Without the final demand of Chinese opium sales, the entire world structure of British trade would have collapsed. It is around the slave production and transport of cotton that Britain gathered allies in the United States into the orbit of the East India Company's opium trade cycle." Unquote. America's first multi-millionaire was a Freemason who got rich smuggling opium. John Jacob Astor was the founder of the New York Astor family dynasty during the Revolutionary era. He was a BEIC stockholder and a pioneer of the opium trade in China. Astor served as the Grand Treasurer of the Masonic Grand Lodge of New York. He was one of the first members of Holland Lodge No. 8 and served as Master of the Lodge in 1788, the same lodge George Washington was affiliated with, as was the famous revolutionary figure, the Marquis de Lafayette. Much later, 33rd degree Mason and former President Franklin Delano Roosevelt would become a member of this lodge. FDR's grandfather, Warren Delano, also became filthy rich smuggling opium into China, Skull and Bones initiate John Forbes Carey's ancestors were traders who also got rich through opium. His mother is a direct descendant of the elitist clan Forbes. In fact, William Hathaway Forbes was a director at HSBC shortly after it was founded in 1866. It should be noted that 3 members of this Forbes family were head partners of Russell & Company, which was the largest American opium trading company during the 19th century. It also helped create HSBC Bank. The company was headed by Samuel Russell, the first cousin of the founder of Skull and Bones, William Huntington Russell. It's no coincidence that Carey would later become an initiate into Yale's Skull and Bones. Carey's family also has deep roots into Freemasonry through James Forbes, the 16th Lord Forbes, who served as Grand Master of the Grand Lodge of Scotland in the mid-1700s. And the Forbes family has a lineage that extends all the way back to the St. Clair family of Roslyn.
As you look out over my shoulder, this is not Holland. This is heroin on the streets of New York, or London, or Los Angeles. These flowering acres are acres of opium poppies, in flower, in bulb, being milked, being harvested. And it's not just one region, it's all regions. Although they may be unable to exploit the vast aquifer of the Helmand or the North, the entire country plants opium. It almost leaves you in awe of how breathtakingly wrong it all is.
Monarchy gave way to oligarchy in England long ago with the arrival of the Venetian bankers and William of Orange. That's when England's people lost England to the Dutch, Swiss, and wealthy elite resource monopoly families in the Livery Guild memberships. By creating a voting England, a corrupted system of fair play could be promoted among the people so the oligarchy can do pretty much what they want, wrapped in a Union Jack. Let's have another look at this picture. The marriage of William of Orange to Mary II in 1677. First of all, they were first cousins. Second of all, William was 27, Mary was 15. Third, William was an open homosexual. But I guess this is all okay. These are royals. I doubt little William came over in an armada and conquered England, but I bet some old bankers did. I keep coming back to this valley and this crop. This is certainly a descendant of one of the varieties imported from Kew Gardens in England after opium was collected in the wild, brought to Kew, and selectively bred to promote high-yield resinous strains. These were then reintroduced into the Indian Empire, an empire that included the now Golden Triangle Asian production and the Pakistan-Afghanistan Western Golden Crescent. In fact, all drug routes were and are still co-located in former colonial holdings, exploited by the Livery Guild companies of the City of London and the Crown of England. Although the financial arrangement has changed somewhat, this business is still conducted for the benefit of the guilds that now handle the former holdings of the former Honorable East India Company. Only the names have been changed to protect the guilty.
Those guilty of the modern-day underground drug trade are descended from the blood-soaked hands of the psychopaths who relentlessly drugged and murdered 19th century Chinese civilians, ultimately causing 2 wars to ensure the existence and continuation of the black market drug trade and the profits gained from it. Beginning in the year 1767, the British began setting up their Masonic network in China. This was done to combat an edict made by the Chinese emperor. The edict restricted all foreigners and foreign vessels to a trading area in the port city of Canton. Unsurprisingly, the first Masonic lodge on Chinese soil was in the trading area in the port city of Canton. Amity Lodge number 407. The East India Company was prohibited from carrying the opium, so the BEIC did business with drug runners who would buy opium from the BEIC's port in Canton and smuggle it into China. These drug runners would then give the dope to the Chinese Triad Society. The Triad Society and the British Masonic network worked hand in hand to smuggle opium illegally into China. The Triad Society was the Chinese Mafia, also known as the Society of Heaven and Earth. Not coincidentally, the Triads cooperated with European Freemasons and had similar initiations, functionality, secret signs, grips, and language to that of Freemasonry. The ceremony of initiation into the Triad is as follows. The candidate is blindfolded, led into a room in the center of which stand a circle of Triads. A bridge of swords is then formed over his head, and then swears an oath of secrecy. In other words, the Triads were the Chinese Freemasons. Quote, the Triad gang smuggled the drugs out of the warehouse area and into the pores of the communities, and like the Italian Mafia 100 years later, if any of their members or government officials got out of line, they were ruthlessly eliminated, unquote. During the 19th century, the Chinese emperor had enough of the opium traffic to the point he confiscated and burned 20,000 chests of opium in the year 1830. The only way now for London to profit off of opium was to win the right through war. According to author John Daniel, quote, in preparation for the war, the BEIC opened in 1839 its first Masonic lodge at Basra, present-day southern Iraq, to function as a center for Great Britain's intelligence operations under the guise of Pan-Islamism. Over the next 3 decades, intelligence lodges were established at every port where the BEIC landed. These British Masonic outposts served to control the movement of drug traffic to the west, unquote. The first Opium War started in the year 1839 and the second in 1856. Both were under the command of High Freemason Lord Palmerston. Lord Palmerston was considered at the time to be the High Patriarch of Freemasonry, mainly for his interactions with a multitude of underground revolutionary secret societies. From the authors of Dope Inc., quote, Palmerston's irregulars employed in illegal dope trafficking, assassinations, and fifth-column subversions against the United States in the period before and during the Civil War are the linear ancestors of what is now called organized crime. The Chinese Triads, the Order of Zion, and its American spin-off, the B'nai B'rith, Young Italy, whose Sicilian law enforcement arm became known as the Mafia, the Jesuit order based in decaying Habsburg Austria, Mikhail Bakunin's bomb-throwing anarchist gangs, and nearly every other inhabitant of Britain's political netherworld followed a chain of command that led through the Scottish Rite of Freemasonry directly to Lord Palmerston and his successors, unquote. A mere 10,000 Briton troops decimated 350 million Chinese. As one drug trafficker famously remarked, quote, as long as this country maintains its drug traffic, there is not the slightest possibility that it will ever become a military threat, unquote. The conclusion of the First Opium War forced China to repay Britain for the confiscated opium stockpiles by the Chinese emperor, and territorial sovereignty was given to the British Crown over several designated offshore islands, including control over Hong Kong. Following the First Opium War, Masonic lodges in China grew exponentially. Royal Sussex Lodge No. 735 was warranted in Canton in 1844. The Grand Lodge of England then established lodges in southern China at Amoy, Canton, Foochow, Swatow, and 5 at Hong Kong. Hong Kong till this day, through HSBC Bank, is the capital of Britain's drug-running operations. By 1860, the British won both opium wars, thus opening up all of China to the opium trade. John Daniel continues, The British East India Company turned over to the triads the shipping of drugs into China and went into legitimate business by incorporating merchant banks and trading companies on the island of Hong Kong and the port of Shanghai under the corporate name of Hong Kong and Shanghai Corporation. Banking became the primary source of legitimate revenue for the Masonic oligarchy, revenue that was generated by the financing of poppy farmers, drug manufacturers, and the laundering of dirty drug money deposited by the triads. The listed founder of HSBC is one Sir Thomas Sutherland, a knighted British Parliament member and member of the British Order of St. John of Jerusalem. In a Masonic publication published in the year 1896, under the special sanction of the Prince of Wales, who was the Grand Master of England at the time, Sir Thomas Sutherland is listed as a Brother Mason. As a result of the banking establishment, the BEIC dissolved in the year 1873. In 1898, a 99-year lease was given to the British for the outright control of Hong Kong. The lease ended in July of 1997. Hong Kong believes it's free from the British Masonic reign. However, HSBC and Standard Chartered Bank remains to this day printing all of Hong Kong's currency. Thus, control still remains in the hands of London. The opium trade never ceased. The poppies of India were later transported to two main areas, one in the Golden Triangle in Southeast Asia where the CIA fought a drug war known as Vietnam, the other in Afghanistan, where the U.S. took full control of the opium fields in 2001 after the invasion. Located at the base of HSBC Bank in Hong Kong is a gigantic Masonic Scottish Rite temple, the Zetland Hall, named after British Parliament Freemason the 2nd Earl of Zetland. At street level you can clearly see HSBC Bank directly behind the lodge. Zetland Hall was originally constructed the same year HSBC came into existence in the year 1865. It is the unseen mechanism that brought HSBC into existence in the first place, and the hidden hand behind the modern black market drug trade.
Hello friends, I'm Tex Mars. It's great to be with you again here from Power of Prophecy. Today we're going to be looking at what I think is one of the most important issues of our day. Recently we did a video that's available here at the ministry entitled Thunder Over Zion. You know, the Bible clearly shows that events are going to head up. I mean, we're going to have a culmination of apocalyptic type events in the Middle East, in the so-called Holy Land, in Israel in these last days. We're going to look today, though, at a secret society, an elite group of men. I believe they have grabbed hold of much of the finance, the commerce, the political rulerships of this world today, and they even have their grasp, almost a stranglehold, on most of the religious groups of today and the religions, including Christianity, unfortunately. These are men of the Illuminati. They are Jewish because there's no doubt the Bible talks about Jerusalem. Revelation 11 verse 8 calls Jerusalem Sodom and Egypt, a very wicked city in the last days. And yet their control extends throughout planet Earth. They have been using the United States as their proxy, because for many years they have sought to gain control of the United States, because even today, this is what is called the last great superpower on earth. To get their way, they must control the United States. With the United States, then the United Nations and all of the rest of the nations of the world, including, of course, the European community, will come under their sway. Now, the Bible, as I said, the Holy Bible, has the answers that we need to truly understand the plot and agenda of these men. But listen to what it says in Zechariah in terms of prophecy. God himself said these words. He says, "Behold, I will make Jerusalem a cup of trembling unto all the people." Trouble. And there never seems to be an end to the trouble in Israel, the trouble among the Jews. Then Isaiah 59 verse 8 talks, I believe, of the Illuminati, the Jewish Illuminati. It says, "The way of peace they know not, and there is no judgment in their goings. They have made them crooked paths. Whosoever goeth therein shall not know peace." The Bible says, when they shall say, "Peace, peace," then shall sudden destruction come upon them, and they shall not escape. The Apostle Paul wrote about that. A lot of people ask me, Tex, is there proof that there exists this secret elite, this Masonic influence in the world today? I'm convinced there is, and they themselves admit this in many of their most august writings. For example, Manly P. Hall, who was called by the Scottish Rite, that is the largest distribution magazine in the Freemasonry world. Manly P. Hall died a few years ago, but he wrote many books, and he was called in the Scottish Rite Journal, was called the greatest Masonic scholar of the 20th century. Let me tell you what he wrote in one of his books. He talked about the Hegelian dialectic process, which is he called the universal motion. And basically he talked about the fact that the whole world is being psychically driven to its destiny. But listen what he says about the elite, the Illuminati, the high-level Masons, even beyond, you might say, the 33rd degree. He says there exists in the world today, and has existed for thousands of years, a body of enlightened humans united in what might be termed an order of the quest. Mr. Hall said it is composed of those whose intellectual and spiritual perceptions have revealed to them that civilization has a secret destiny. Manly P. Hall, of course, would know these things because, as I said, he was called the greatest Masonic scholar of the 20th century and was a 33-degree Mason. One of the classic books he wrote is entitled The Secret Teachings of All Ages. Many people wonder aloud today, Freemasonry, is it Jewish? Can we say that it is comprised almost virtually of Jews? Well, one thing is for sure, it is controlled, I believe, behind the scenes by high-level Jewish interest. You know, many, many years ago, from Chicago, Illinois, was a publication that came out called Women's Voice. And back in 1953, they had a feature article called the B'nai B'rith's Clause. Now, the B'nai B'rith is a Jewish Masonic lodge headquartered out of New York City, but with worldwide influence. In fact, even the Pope of Rome invited the B'nai B'rith members to the Vatican and met with them, and I have a picture of that. But notice also this headline in Women's Voice. It says, Freemasonry is jewelry. In other words, if you're a Freemason, you're likely to be a Jew. I've noticed as I've gone around the United States and visited many Masonic lodges and, of course, the House of the Temple of Washington, D.C., I've noticed that the prominence and the predominance of the Jewish six-pointed star, the Star of David that you see on the flag of Israel, it seems to be everywhere in Masonic lodges, and there's a reason for that. Here's an article from the CDL report some years ago. It said, Freemasonry is Jewish, say the Jews. So we're not talking about, defaming or slandering Jews. They say that this is true. In the book Anti-Semitism by Bernard Lazare, he says there were Kabbalistic Jews around the cradle of Freemasonry, as certain rites still in existence prove conclusively. They were at the very cradle, at the origins, at the beginning of Freemasonry. Now, Rabbi Isaac Wise, way back in 1855, had this to say. He stated, Freemasonry is a Jewish establishment whose history, grades, official appointments, passwords, and explanations are Jewish from beginning to end. So-called Masonic brother Rudolf Klein of the Grand Lodge of Saxony in Germany was asked about the Jewish rituals that are conducted in Masonic lodges. And he said Jewish ritual is customary and valid in all Freemasonic lodges of the world. In the Jewish Tribune newspaper, way back in 1927 in the United States, we read, Freemasonry is based on Judaism. Eliminate the teachings of Judaism from the Masonic ritual, and what is left? In a French publication in 1928 called Le Symbolisme, it says the important duty of a Freemason must be to glorify the Jewish race. So over and over again we see that Judaism is Freemasonry. And this is very fascinating, is it not? Now, we go on to look at some other aspects of this. For example, in the New Age movement, it seems that the New Age movement's leaders also know about the Masonic context of Freemasonry. This is an excerpt from the book The Rays and the Initiations by Alice Bailey. Now, she's the founder of Lucis Trust, which is a combination name, by the way, of Lucifer and Isis. Lucis Trust. And her book, entitled The Rays and the Initiation, way back in 1960, one of the major New Age texts available at all New Age and occult bookstores, she on page 418, she states that the time has now come in preparation for the New Age for certain changes to be worked by Masons with spiritual understanding. She mentions the present Jewish color of Freemasonry. She says the Blue Lodge degrees, that's the first 3 degrees of Freemasonry, are entirely Jewish in phrasing and wording. She says even the higher degrees are permeated with Jewish names and words. Now, Alice Bailey, like her mentor, Helena Blavatsky, who wrote The Secret Doctrine and founded the Theosophy Society, was a co-Mason, a woman Mason. Now, this is from a book sent to me from Greece, and some of the Christians over in Greece have been exposing this. I'm sorry you can't read the Greek title of this book, but inside it was a chart from the United States, and I think this is most fascinating. If you'll look at this very carefully, this is from a jewelry store in New York City. Now, it's Kirschenbaum and Son Wholesaler Jewelries on 78 Canal Street, New York to New York. This is probably about 30 years old. It says that this is a chart of the most important Masonic emblems. And from on the right-hand side, beginning after the Blue Lodge with the 4th degree, Secret Master, going all the way up to the 32nd degree, they have the list of names of the various Masonic degrees, the rituals and the degree that you are awarded if you pass the initiation exercise, drama, and test for that degree. And it shows very clearly, for example, that most of the names have a Jewish influence. There is the Knight of the Brazen Serpent, the Prince of the Tabernacle, Chief of the Tabernacle. There's the Prince of Jerusalem. I mean, how more direct can you be? If you've got the if you've worked up to the 16th degree in Freemasonry, you'll be awarded the Prince of Jerusalem title. And there's a number of others to boot. The Knight Kadosh, number 30, the 30th degree, is also Masonic. Some years ago, as I began to look at Freemasonry and its relationship to Israel, in fact, the control of Israel by Masons, let me repeat that. Today, Israel, the nation of Israel, and the higher level Jewish positions in banking, finance, the media, the corporate world in the United States and Europe, and let me go on to include South America, Asia, and other continents in that as well. The higher level positions are all held by Masons, Freemasons. So the Masonic Lodge and Judaism or Jewry are deeply connected. Now, in a magazine called Inside Israel, the August 1996 edition. Now, this is an Israeli source, a Jewish source. It gave this fact, and by the way, this was also reported in Mahariv, the daily newspaper in Tel Aviv, and by other Jewish sources in the nation of Israel. Let me just read a little bit to you here. It says, on May 3rd, 1996, Tel Aviv police raided an apartment, joined by reporters from the state-run television news program and the daily newspaper Devar Rishon. They found a bizarre scene. The walls were covered in Latin script. Skulls and bones graced the shelves. Swords were crossed and mounted around an altar. 5 doors led to secret passageways with red blinking intruder warning lights. The news report the next day announced, quote, the apartments were used for ceremonies by the Freemasons, an organization whose membership, and we're talking about Israeli membership, Jewish membership, whose membership boasts cabinet ministers and high-ranking army officers. Fascinating. Goes on to say that in spring of 1994, 2 other Israeli publications, Yediat Aronot and the Shishi, published long articles about Freemasonry in Israeli society. Both newspaper reports agreed that Prime Minister, that is the late Prime Minister, Yitzhak Rabin, had been a Mason since the 1960s, and that in 1976, Rabin presided over a large Masonic convention in Jerusalem. Benjamin Netanyahu, the Prime Minister, was also said to be a Mason. He was recruited when he was Israel's ambassador to the United Nations in New York City in the 1980s. Both newspapers observed that King Hussein, now he's a Muslim, isn't he? Yes, he is. He's an Arab. But King Hussein of Jordan had been a high-ranking and proud Mason who often traveled to London, England, to participate in secret Masonic ceremonies. Quite fascinating, isn't it? And he goes on to talk about the Masons. Here's a book sent to me by Barry Kamish called Traitors and Carpetbaggers in the Promised Land, a journal of Israel's betrayal. Mr. Kamish is a very fascinating writer. He talks in here about the Kissinger connection, the CFR connection, the Clinton connection, the Vatican connection, the Mormon connection, the Rabin assassination connection, and there is a chapter in here about the Masons who appear to be in control of the nation of Israel. Then we go on a little further to document the influence of Freemasonry in Israel. In October 1993, in the La Repubblica, that's an Italian newspaper, one of the most respected daily newspapers in Italy, La Repubblica, October 1993, was an article entitled Israel, the Pact Between Politicians and Masons. Fascinating, isn't it? It reported on a gala 40th anniversary celebration in Jerusalem of the founding of the Great Lodge of the State of Israel of ancient and accepted Freemasons. It says the ceremony was attended by the mayor of Jerusalem, Teddy Kollek, as well as the chief rabbi, Israel Meir Lau. The chief rabbi of Israel, Meir Lau. Now, here's what the mayor of Jerusalem now, told the gathering of Masons. He said, quote, "You do a great honor to Jerusalem. This is natural," said Mayor Kollek, "considering that King Solomon was the great builder of the temple, which is at the roots of the Masonic idea, and that his workmen were the first Masons." Well, the rabbi now, for his own part, when he got up to speak to this big gala meeting of Masons, Jews came from all over the world to it, Rabbi Lau, now remember he's the chief Jewish rabbi for the whole nation of Israel, he stated this. He said, quote, "The principles of Freemasonry are all contained in the book of books of the Jewish people." It was noted that there were 4,000 Israeli Freemasons, and they were divided into 76 different lodges. I went on the internet and researched this subject. I found, for example, that there is even in Jerusalem a Grand Lodge. A Grand Lodge of Jerusalem. Now, this is also fascinating because I went back and I did a lot of research into all of my Masonic references. Here, for example, is Volume 2 of the Encyclopedia of Freemasonry. Notice on the spine here, it's by Albert Mikey, 33rd degree, and Charles McClanahan, 33rd degree. Okay? Now, in this tremendous resource, and I can't even tell you how many pages it is, but it goes to about 1,000 pages, and notice it's got gold, gilt edging around it. But I found some very interesting information. For example, on page 753, there is a very interesting illustration, piece of artwork of the Masonic Lodge of Jerusalem. They use the name Palestine because, of course, before Israel was founded in the 1947-48 era by the United Nations, that area of the world, Israel, was called, in fact, Palestine. And now today, of course, Palestine, we think of the Palestinian region that's controlled by Yasser Arafat and the PLO. But in fact, that was called Palestine. And this particular piece of art says, this is called the Foundation of the Royal Order of the Freemasons in Palestine. And it's dated AM 4037. Now, AM 4037, you see, the Masons have a different, they refuse to accept the chronological system that goes all the way, the AD that we use, because AD means Anno Domini, or after Christ. So they use their own system, the year of light. This means that this picture of this lodge of the Freemasons in the country of Palestine can be dated back 1,700 years. 1,700 years. Now, we're going to reveal a few secrets to you here about the Masons and the Jews. I'm going to show you a couple of pictures of Jewish Masons who set tremendous, let's just say they set records for bloodshed and bloodthirstiness. Here is a gentleman, for example. I hesitate to call him a gentleman. His name, Karl Marx. Karl Marx. He's called the father of communism, of course. Lenin, Trotsky, Stalin, and the others took his ideas and, you might say, ran with them. Now notice as you look again at the body of Karl Marx, notice that his hand inside his jacket in a very strange position. Of course, that is a Masonic hand sign. That is a Masonic hand sign. He then was a Mason. And by the way, my research shows that he also was a high priest of the Church of Satan. Not the one founded by Anton LaVey in 1966 in California, but the long-standing Church of Satan. He was indeed a satanic priest. He was with a group called the League of Just Men, and he worked very close with a Jewish Zionist. He believed in a new world order for Zionism. He was a Jew. But of course, he was also a Jew, interestingly enough, who hated God. Now, we also have a picture of another, let's just call him, let me clear my throat when I call him that, another gentleman. Here is Vladimir Lenin. Lenin was also, it is now admitted, after the fall of the USSR and the breakup of all their republics under Mikhail Gorbachev, more recently in Boris Yeltsin, it's now admitted that this man, Vladimir Lenin, who founded communism within the USSR, he, Trotsky, Stalin, and others, that he was indeed a Jew. And he was married to a Jew, Miss Krupskaya. So Lenin was 100% a Jew. His mother was a Jew. This was a secret that the Russians kept from the people until just recently, and now the history books are now recording that he was Jewish, as was the number 2 man of the Soviet Communist Revolution, the Bolsheviks, that was Trotsky. He also was Jew. In fact, of the 5 founders, Stalin was not one of the 5 founders, but of the 5 founders of communism, the top 5 founders of communism in Russia, all 5 were indeed Jews, and all 5 were Freemasons. So we have the Masonic Jewish connection. Now, since we know that under communism, probably as many as, it is said, we have really no idea, 25 to 50 million Russians and from the other republics have been massacred, tortured, purged, sent to Gulag concentration camps. Now we can attribute this to those Jewish communist Bolsheviks, of course led by the ideology and the satanic writings of Karl Marx back in the 19th century. Now let's move on up to today. And I believe that the Jewish Masons who run Israel and to a great extent run the United States and Europe today, these men are no less bloodthirsty in my opinion. They just cover it up a lot better. You know, I received a newspaper called the Jerusalem Post, and I'd like to show you, if I could, an article. In fact, I've made a copy of it so it'd be a little bit easier to show here on television. This is an advertisement in the Jerusalem Post newspaper of November 1994. Let me try to hold that a little straight here for you. Notice this, the sign at the top is the Grand Lodge of the State of Israel logo. This ad says, the Grand Lodge of the State of Israel of ancient, free, and accepted Masons. And it's addressed to the Masons of Peace. Who are they? Well, the Honorable Yitzhak Rabin, Prime Minister of Israel, His Majesty King Hussein of Jordan, and the Honorable Bill Clinton of the United States. It says, with warm fraternal congratulations on the signing of the peace agreement between Israel and Jordan. And it's signed by Ephraim Fuchs, President of the Israel Order of Masons. Here we have an admission. He's actually inviting them when they came over for the peace, for a talk with, there was a big Masonic gala extravaganza to be held, and he welcomed Rabin, Hussein, and Clinton. Now remember, Rabin, of course, was the Prime Minister of Israel, a Jew. But King Hussein of Jordan was a Muslim. And Bill Clinton of the United States was said to be a Christian. But they all were fraternal brothers and Masons and Illuminati, shouldn't we say? Well, today's front page put up by my good friend John Barella had this picture. And of course this was in all of the newspapers, on television. There were the secret, the agreement that was signed that this talks about. These 3 Freemasons meeting. You see Prime Minister Rabin on this side here. Here's Prime Minister Rabin on this side. In the middle, President Clinton. And on the other side, we have the King of Jordan, Hussein. Now, fascinating as it is, Prime Minister Rabin was assassinated, the Prime Minister of Israel, and the King of Jordan, Hussein, died of cancer since this picture was taken just a few short years ago. Clinton, of course, still seems to be in his heyday, and his wife fully intends to run for president very soon. But in any case, here we have these 3 Masons. Now, I'd like you to look very carefully. You can't really maybe get a close-up, but I wish you could, because if you saw the position of their hands, here I have another picture. It might be a little bit better from another newspaper. And if you look very close, you will see a Masonic handshake between Hussein and Rabin. A Masonic handshake. Oh yes, they are fraternal brothers according to the Masonic organization. And by the way, here they are. This is from U.S. News and World Report. And here they are signing the peace agreement. How happy they were. It seemed to flop and fall apart though, because as you know, the bloodshed and fighting went on and on. Here's a picture in memoriam to Prime Minister Rabin right after he was assassinated in 1995, which goes to show there is no honor among thieves. And some of the more rigid among the Jews are not happy with what even the Masons are doing. And it's highly believed in Israel today that the secret spy agency Shin Bet saw to the murder of Yitzhak Rabin. Now, let's move on a little bit more with our proofs about the Masons that run the lodge today. For example, I recently had a letter from a gentleman. He wanted to remind me that on television was the funeral of Prime Minister Rabin. And he says, "Dear Tex, I want you to know that I watched very carefully the funeral service of the Israeli Prime Minister Shimon Peres, who took over the government after the murder of Rabin, and the Jordan King Hussein. And I noticed that at the service they called each other brother. After listening to your tapes and other materials, I know now that they meant that they were brother Masons." And yes, that's true, because in the lodge they each call themselves brother, just like the Baptist churches do. And I think that's sort of an interesting parallel, by the way, since many Baptist pastors are Masons, they call themselves brother. Call each other brother, I should say. Now, some years ago, a gentleman who was with a Christian television station in Washington, D.C., asked me, was I aware of the location of what appears to be possibly even a secret lodge in Jerusalem. And I was not fully aware of it at the time. Now I have been doing a lot of research on it. He said, "I'm going to send you the pictures that I took when I made one of my trips to Israel, and you'll find it very fascinating." He said, "I visited in a place that not many Christians go to, the Cave of Zedekiah." Now here is a picture showing the Cave of Zedekiah. It looks like a very forlorn and mysterious place up above this little bus here. But they took them inside this cave nevertheless. Now remember, Zedekiah was the sort of the bad king, if you'll remember, during the time of Jeremiah. And he did what he shouldn't have done and showed the riches of the kingdom of Israel to the Babylonians and caused the invasion of Israel. And Jeremiah prophesied against Zedekiah. So it would be appropriate if inside this cave, and by the way, here is the entrance to the cave. And let me give you a little closer shot of the entrance of the cave. Okay? You can actually visit this place now, although they will not let you into the Masonic lodge. Way deep inside the tunnels of this place, there is a Masonic lodge. They won't let you in that, of course. But they went inside this, and they didn't realize what they were going to find. By the way, here is some of the wording of what you will find inscribed there. It'll tell you all about Zedekiah's cave and so forth. Here's my friend, by the way, inside one of the tunnels, who went in and was able to make this interesting discovery. Here, by the way, is another scene inside the tunnels. You can see they're quite vast and still really quite rough and primitive inside. But deep, deep within, they began to get narrower and narrower, and then finally they came to a door. And this door was locked, and it was padlocked. And my friend asked the guide, "What is that inside there in that room?" It was apparently a huge room or cavern inside. And he said, "That is the Freemasons' Hall. And once a month," he said, "the Grand Lodge meets there. These Masons meet under the earth, deep down in Zedekiah's cave." And then he looked and he found this, the amazing thing. He found this plaque on the wall, evidently in Hebrew and English, that told a little bit about the Freemasons' Hall. The Masons, the Masonic Lodge, actually meets deep under the earth. in the cave of Zedekiah. Well, how appropriate for Freemasons. Here's an article that came out of, I got this out of the book Secret Societies and Psychological Warfare by Michael Hoffman. I want to give him credit, pages 50 and 51. This article out of the Canadian Jewish newspaper back in 1990, page 29. Picture of a Mason. You can see all of his regalia, his apron and so forth, and the sash and so forth. It says, Cohen, Samuel H. Cohen, is named to the Grand Lodge. And this article says, Samuel Cohen, a native Torontonian from Toronto, an active community leader, recently became the third Mason in the organization's history to become the Canadian representative to the Grand Lodge of the State of Israel. And he says, the lineage of modern Masons can be traced back to the stone masons and builders of the Middle Ages. Very interesting. It says more than 200 Masons from the Grand Lodges, the lodges in Ontario and in other places in Canada attended a reception in Cohen's honor. It says 2 of the lodges in Ontario, the Mount Sinai Lodge and the Palestine Lodge, are predominantly Jewish. In other words, they're almost all made of Jews, the Masons in those 2 lodges there in Ontario, Canada. They went to a reception for Mr. Cohen. So the Grand Lodge of Jerusalem of Israel actually has representatives from all nations of the world. And this was the Canadian representative. Let's look at some of these Masons in the Middle East area then who have affected world history. Here is the king of Jordan, King Hussein. He died recently of cancer. Here's a picture, I'm sure, sorry it's not too clear, of Shimon Peres, who is a Mason. And he is right here, Shimon Peres. And on the other side entirely is King Hussein. Now in the middle is King Hussein's son, the crown prince, Hassan. And recently when the king died, the crown prince took over. Hey, if you want to need another Mason, I saw him on a TV program actually admit he was a Mason. And remember the Israeli publication that said this man, Benjamin Netanyahu, former prime minister, still one of the most powerful politicians in Israel, and he comes to the United States, speaks perfect English. He has a graduate master's degree, that is, from MIT University in Massachusetts. Here he is sitting in a outdoor restaurant in, I believe it's Tel Aviv, I know it's in Israel, with his wife, and his bodyguards are all around him. He has admitted that he is in fact a Mason. Here's another picture from one of the American news magazines, I believe it's Newsweek, of Mr. Netanyahu. And then here's a picture in a Jewish publication called the Jerusalem Post of Netanyahu. And there he is with one of the Jewish rabbis who is a member of the Knesset, the Shas party, one of the very orthodox Jewish parties in the Israeli parliament. Here's some more pictures for you. Here is the secretary under President Clinton, our secretary. Here's right here, our Secretary of Agriculture. And the caption says, the Agriculture Minister of Israel, Raphael Atan, is seen with the U.S. Secretary of Agriculture, Dan Glickman. Let's get a little close-up of that again. Dan Glickman, who's the Secretary of Agriculture under Clinton, meeting with his counterpart, Mr. Atan. Now, Mr. Atan is a 33rd degree Mason, and as my book, Days of Hunger, Days of Chaos, proved, Glickman also is a 33rd degree Mason. And by the way, look at the handshake. Yes, it is. It's a Masonic handshake. Oh, they have their secret ways of communicating, do they not? Here's another picture, very interesting. This is King Abdullah II. He has taken over now the kingdom of Jordan. King Abdullah II, they call him. Remember I showed you the picture of the crown prince? His father, King Hussein, died. Now it's King Abdullah II. And he's giving a nice little Masonic handshake to the former Prime Minister of Israel, Ehud Barak. Ehud Barak. Well, who would ever thought the King of Jordan, a Muslim, would be so Masonically connected with the Prime Minister, former Prime Minister of Israel. Now we have another set of pictures here. Here are two more Freemasons for you. There is Rabbi Lau, the chief rabbi of Israel, and he's meeting with none other than Mubarak, the president of Egypt. Well, he's a Muslim. And there he's meeting with the chief rabbi. And look at that hand sign of the rabbi. Interesting. Well, we go on more. This is, by the way, that was from the, I want to make sure you understand, that was from the Omega Times newspaper, January 1998. Now we have something interesting. This is the Council on Foreign Relations journal. This is the actual yearbook that the Council on Foreign Relations in New York City, the most powerful men in the world meet, the Rockefellers and all the others. They meet, including, most of the Bush administration are members of this, including Colin Powell, of course, is a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. Here is Shimon Peres, former Prime Minister, now Foreign Minister of the State of Israel, and he's giving a nice little Masonic handshake to one of the CFR officials. He was the speaker in New York at a meeting of the Council on Foreign Relations. Friends, it gets thicker and thicker, doesn't it? By the way, here is a picture. I can't really see. I don't want to stretch it at all. This is a picture in one of the Jerusalem Report of February 12, 2001. We have a picture from some years ago of the President Anwar Sadat, who was assassinated. There he is here, of Egypt. He was assassinated. He's shaking hands with Ariel Sharon, who was the defense minister of Israel at the time. And right between them is the prime minister, former prime minister of Israel. His name was Shamir. Shamir. It's interesting that the name Shamir in Hebrew, I am told, means serpent, the serpent. Shimon Peres, the name Peres, by the way, was not his real name, but he adopted that name. It means black bird. It's sort of interesting, isn't it? Criminal Politics is a magazine that comes out once a month. My good friend, Dr. Lawrence Patterson, does a great job in many respects. He's talking about Robert Dole, former Senate Majority Leader when he ran for president. He says Dole sought the Israeli backing, but it was rejected. They chose Clinton instead, and that may be one of the reasons why Dole lost the election. Here's from an article in the Washington Jewish Week newspaper. It says, Dole at B'nai B'rith promises closer ties to Israel. Nevertheless, they said, we're already getting everything we want from Bill Clinton. Why should we change horses in midstream? This is Jerusalem Post, October 31, 1996. Very interesting shot, is it not? This was at the a memorial service for the slain Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin. His wife is right below the head there. Notice the U.S. flag, the Israeli flag. And then you see, right over here, you see a gentleman that most of you know his name, Albert Gore, Vice President of the United States. On the other side of Leah Rabin, the widow, is the Rabbi Lau, the same one I showed you with Mubarak. He seems to be everywhere, doesn't he? The chief Jewish rabbi. And, of course, Gore and all the rest of them are indeed Masons. Now, it's interesting. I have a newspaper article that was fascinating that I got from Israel. Everyone was shocked when Gore went to Israel and spoke in the Hebrew language. Look at this. I want to take that picture again. Look at the stance of Gore. Look what he looks like. Isn't that odd? The way he's standing, so straight, so erect, so militant, so Masonic. Okay. By the way, Mr. Gore was funded. His father was was also a senator, Albert Gore Sr., and both of them were funded in their careers by gold mines given to them by the Jewish Masonic Illuminatus Armand Hammer. Way back in American history, of course, we can go back. Here is the $1 bill, and on it you'll see on the right-hand side here the symbol, the eagle of the United States. Notice the Jewish influence, though. Did you know that above the eagle on our $1 bill is found the Star of David? Very carefully and craftily constructed. 13 stars in the form of a Star of David. Look very carefully. Get out your dollar bill. I'm sorry if you can't see that clearly, but get a dollar bill out of your billfold and look at it. Then, of course, over the left-hand side, you see the pyramid with the all-seeing eye and the words Novus Ordo Seclorum on this side of the dollar bill. There again, the Masonic symbol. Both the Jewish Star of David and the pyramid are found on the U.S. $1 bill. They were put there by Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who was said to be secretly a Jew. And, interestingly enough, Mr. Roosevelt, of course, was a high-level Freemason, naturally. Well, let's go on a little bit further and talk a little bit about Freemasonry. We have, for example, the B'nai B'rith. I'd like to talk a moment about the B'nai B'rith of Freemasonry. The B'nai B'rith, says this article in the Chicago Tribune of April 18, 1993, B'nai B'rith. Now remember I told you that is the Jewish Masonic Lodge. They also control the Anti-Defamation League, the ADL, the B'nai B'rith, very powerful Freemasons, headquartered out of New York. But yet this article says that they are a target of a police probe. It turns out they've been spying on Americans. That's what I call it, in my opinion, spying, keeping files and records on pesky and troublesome Americans that they don't agree with, their politics. And they work very closely with the FBI and the CIA. I believe the Jewish ADL and the B'nai B'rith, this Jewish Masonic Lodge, my opinion is they control the FBI. Remember, the founder of the FBI, J. Edgar Hoover, was a 33rd degree Freemason and was thought to be Jewish as well. Here's a picture of a no-good. The late Roy Bullock. He was also arrested by the police. Look at that thug, if you will. And it was said that he was breaking into people's apartments and stealing materials and such as that. And Bullock was an agent evidently for the Jewish ADL. Now, because of their political influence, many of the charges were later dropped, I understand. They paid some kind of a fine or something, the B'nai B'rith did. Here's an article I have, very interesting, out of, let's see, it's the New York Times. It says, on March 22, 1984, the Pope, the Catholic Pope, held a meeting with members of the International Jewish Anti-Defamation League of B'nai B'rith. He acknowledged the close relationship between B'nai B'rith and the Catholic Commission for Religious Relationships with Judaism. Interesting. And he said there is constant development and strengthening of these relationships. Now, since it's believed by most people that Pope John Paul II is indeed a high-level Freemason, and we can see then why he is connected with Jewish Freemasonry and with the lodge that controls Israel. Now, what is the goal of the Masonic Lodge over Jerusalem? And the Jews, the high-level Masonic Jews who run much of this world, what is their goal? Well, Albert Pike in 1871 wrote a letter to Giuseppe Mazzini. These were the two leading Freemasons throughout the world. Pike is the man who designed and constructed the 33 rituals for today's Scottish Rite Freemasonic order, the largest order in the world. Pike is probably known by the Masons as their greatest hero in history. He was, by the way, a Confederate Civil War general. And Abraham Lincoln evidently had every intent to hang him after the war for his horrible crimes against humanity, but he fled to Canada until after the assassination of Abraham Lincoln. But Pike wrote a letter. Pike wrote a letter to Mazzini, his Italian and European counterpart, and Mason and Illuminist. And he said, our goal is a series of 3 great wars, world wars. 2 will be fought in Europe. The 3rd and final war will be fought over the Middle East. And he said this final war will include a conflict between the 3 primary religions on earth. The Islamic religion, the Christian religion, the Jewish religion. And these 3 religions will battle each other for superiority and will destroy each other in a horrible apocalyptic cataclysm. But we will foment the 3 wars that will bring this about. And then, of course, their plan was that their great leader would come forth, that Lucifer himself would ordain the final leader of international Freemasonry. I believe that's, from all the literature, that's the only conclusion one can come to. And he will go to Jerusalem. It will be his world capital. He will rebuild the great temple, but it'll be a temple like nothing you've ever seen before. They will say, yes, the Jews, the Muslims, the Christians can all worship here. This will be a temple of all religions and no religions. And the Antichrist will represent all of humankind, except true, Bible-believing Jesus Christians. And he will go furiously to destroy every vestige of Christianity that he can. What is the goal then? First, they would have to demolish the current structures that sit atop the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. What sits there? The Golden Dome. The Golden Dome. Mosque of Islam. The Golden Dome. There's also the Al-Aqsa Mosque that's there. But that Golden Dome has to go. They believe that their temple must be built right on top of that. In fact, the Qatar Coronati, that's the scholarly lodge out of London, England, of Great Britain, sent one of its top professors and scholars, archaeologists, to Israel just a few years ago. And he determined that the very place where the Muslims say that Muhammad was lifted up and ascended into heaven, that is the very place where the Ark of the Covenant must sit. And so the dome must go. How can they get rid of the dome? Well, there must be a war in the Middle East. There must be a World War III, just as Pike told Mazzini, and it must be focused and centered on the Middle East. And maybe those buildings will be destroyed. Maybe they'll blame it on Iran or Iraq or some other Muslim Arab leader. They will say the missiles went over there and from the Arab country, Iraq, Iran, and strayed and blew up. They blew up their own temple. The Arabs did it to themselves. I don't know what their pretext will be. Or there may be other ways that they will get rid of this. Now, interestingly enough, in Time magazine several years ago, talked about a tremendous controversy that had erupted over in Israel. It seems that the Jewish rabbi, Lau, the chief rabbi, oh, that name keeps coming up, doesn't it? Here he is visiting tunnels under the Temple Mount. The Jews opened up these tunnels that had not been opened for hundreds of years, centuries, and they began to go in there and visit those tunnels. And the Muslims were outraged because they believe. And here below we see in the bottom of this article, it talks about, the situation, the setting up, or where these tunnels are underneath the Temple Mount. You can see, of course, here the Dome of the Rock of the Muslims that sit there now. And the plan, they believed, was to use these tunnels to set explosives that will blow up. So they would foment a World War III or a war with the Arabs, and then just as all the bombs were going off in various cities, maybe in Saudi Arabia, in Jordan, in Lebanon, in Egypt, in Iraq and Iran, at the same time missiles or bombs supposedly could be blamed as the cause for the destruction of the Islamic worship places. But in fact, it would be that Jewish agents with powerful bombs would go down deep in these tunnels and blow up the Temple Mount. And this, of course, if this occurred, this could set off World War III, could it not? The fury of the Arabs, of the Muslim world. But, of course, Kriegel Publications, a Christian publication a few years back, published this book, the Kriegel Guide, a pictorial guide to the temple. This is Herod's temple. And this is the temple that many believe that the Masons and the Jews want to rebuild. Others talk about building the Temple of Solomon. The Temple of Solomon. Now, I might mention that if the temple is built again, of course that would fulfill 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, where Paul talked about the Antichrist just before the gathering of the saints by Jesus. The Antichrist would go into a rebuilt temple and declare that he was God and above all gods, and his strong delusion would fall on all the people of the world. Here's an article, by the way, from the Houston Sunday Globe talking about the red heifer. The Jews say we must find a red heifer. A cow that is perfect, that is totally red and does not have one white hair, does not have one brown hair. He's got to have beautiful red hair. He's got to be perfect physically in every way. And here's a rabbi inspecting this red heifer. They believe they may have found one already. And then they will sacrifice this red heifer and use the ashes in the temple. The sacrifice can begin again in a rebuilt temple. Here, a Christian publication, Prophetic Observer, talks about the ashes of the red heifer. But listen to this, my friends. You know, Jesus is the one sacrifice. And if the temple is built again and the Jews begin to have their sacrifices, listen to what Matthew 24 verse 15 says. It says, when ye therefore shall see the abomination of desolation, spoken of by Daniel the prophet, stand in the holy place, then let them which be in Judea flee into the mountains. My friends, that would be the abomination of desolation, to actually sacrifice this red heifer in the temple, the rebuilt temple. Of course, the Bible makes very clear that another temple is going to be built someday, a temple built without hands. And there will be a new Jerusalem, not this earthly Jerusalem, a Jerusalem constructed by Jesus Christ. In the book by Ice and another gentleman, here is a picture of the entrance of the rabbinic place in the Jerusalem where they are now training rabbis and workers to go into the rebuilt temple and to conduct the sacrifices. Here is a man, Rabbi Yehuda Getz, a chief rabbi of all the holy places in Israel. Now that's a different position than Rabbi Lau. And this rabbi claims that he knows where the Ark of the Covenant is, of course, and that they're ready to put it in the rebuilt temple. Of course, that's nonsense, because the Ark of the Covenant is now in heaven. There are museums. There are museums in Israel today. And these museums actually have scale models of the Temple Mount with a rebuilt temple. Oh, they're planning on doing it, my friends. See these? See these scale models? And by the way, one of these scale models, it can be found in the Rockefeller Museum in Jerusalem. Yes, there is a Rockefeller Museum. What are the Chase Manhattan Bank's Rockefellers doing with a museum in Jerusalem? And why does it have a scale model of the temple to be rebuilt? By the way, here's a model of the Ark of the Covenant that these Jews of the Temple Mount Foundation claim that they have readied. They say the real Ark, they know where it's at, but here is just a part of it. By the way, in his book, Albert Pike, remember I talked about him, the former sovereign grand commander of Freemasonry. In this old book, Morals and Dogma, that he wrote, he talks about the meaning of the Temple of Solomon and the necessity of building a Temple of Solomon. In fact, he said, in essence, symbolically, the Temple of Solomon is built in the life of every Mason. So it is their goal to rebuild this Temple of Solomon. Now, let's move real fast here, and I want to tell you about this book, an amazing book. This man, John J. Robinson, wrote this book, The Lost Secrets of Freemasonry. The Masons raved about this book. It was reviewed in their publication, the Scottish Rite Journal. They loved this book. Robinson was actually promoted, if my understanding is correct, to the 33rd degree of Freemasonry through this book. He was not even a Mason at the time he wrote it, but he was promoted. Look at the front cover, what do you see there? You see the Masonic emblem with a G. That's meaning of God, the meaning of the generative principle. But look, it is slowly transformed into what? Of course, the Jewish Star of David. Isn't that fascinating? Now, let me tell you a little bit about this book. Mr. Robinson said in the final chapter of this book that it should be the goal of Freemasons worldwide to build a new temple, the Temple of Solomon, and it should be built there on the Temple Mount. And all religions, not only the three major religions, all religions, but as particularly the Jews, the Muslims, and the Christians, can go to the great Temple of Solomon built by the Masons on the Temple Mount. That's what it says in this book. That's what it says in this book. Powerful, powerful proposal to build a Masonic Temple of Solomon on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. This then is their goal, and their leader will go into this incredible temple. You might want to get my video, Thunder Over Zion, and it talks about the Antichrist and how they will actually stage the coming of the Antichrist. There's even a book that's been written called The Armageddon Script that has the entire script. It'll be a theatrical production. It'll be televised. Everyone will believe in him. Buddhists, Hindus, Christians, Jews, except the true believers of Jesus. Now, friends, what are we to do about this? You know, the Apostle Paul said that the Jews are in bondage. Jerusalem, earthly Jerusalem, is in bondage. I believe we need to pray. We need to pray for the salvation of Jews. We need to pray even for these Masons that their eyes will be opened. We need to pray for our protection. And we need to pray that God will give us even more knowledge of these events of the last days. He promised us in Daniel 12:10, the wise shall understand. Pray for more wisdom. Pray that Jesus Christ's will be done. This is Tex Morris. May God richly bless you.
Historical Research Department has studied from the scholarship of Jewish historians, scholars, and rabbis. And we have published volume number 2 of The Secret Relationship Between Blacks and Jews, and in it you will discover the architecture and the architect. Last night I sent this book and another one that's printed called Negroes at Auction. I sent it to Mr. Abraham Foxman of B'nai B'rith, to all the leaders of the major Jewish organizations. I sent it to President Obama, to Rahm Emanuel, to David Axelrod, to Timothy Geithner, to Larry Summers, to Ben Bernanke, to all the people that should know what was done to us and can no longer hide. That's why Jesus said, "You shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free." What? Don't call me to come on no radio or television show until you have read the book. And then if you can defend this, we know who you are. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. You're Satan. And when your friends start questioning you, say, "Would you read this?" And this will be like showing a vampire the cross or throwing holy water on a vampire. See, because the worst thing that a deceiver wants is for the people deceived to find the truth. In volume 1 of The Secret Relationship, it goes into the horror of the transatlantic slave trade. And the Jewish people were heavily involved in that. How many of you have been to Elmina Castle at Cape Coast in Ghana? Would you raise your hands? If you were there 15 years ago, on the doors of the castle, you would see a Star of David. If you go there now, they took it down. Because they did not want you to understand the connection that they have to the transatlantic slave trade. At the back of this book, from the Jewish Encyclopedia, quote, "The cotton plantations in many parts of the South were wholly in the hands of the Jews, and as a consequence, slavery found its advocates among them." Look at this. Black folk picking cotton. Listen good now. Cotton was then what oil is now. The largest producer of oil in the world are the rich ones, and the strategic interests of America means in order for them to rule, they have to link with where the oil is coming from and take it or maneuver to get it, but they must have oil. In the time of slavery, it was cotton. And it's interesting that the cotton would come down the Mississippi, New Orleans to the Gulf, from Biloxi, Mississippi, and from Mobile, Alabama. And the cotton would come down and go up to New York, where the brethren of the Jewish people in the South, in the North, were the masters of the needle trades. And they had their brothers also in the South taking the lint from the cotton and producing cloth through weaving. But these were Jewish people owning the land. They were the majority. They were the merchants. They were the traders. They knew how to hook up with their brethren in the North. And they would send raw cotton to the mills in England, in Manchester, Leeds, and Bristol, and the British would turn it into cloth and then sell it all over the world. So from cotton, the South became rich. From cotton, it fueled the Industrial Revolution in the North. From cotton, the Rothschilds became rich. From cotton, the Lehman Brothers became rich from cotton in Alabama, then moved to New York and Wall Street. Now this is cotton. North Carolina, Tennessee, South Carolina, Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, Arkansas, Louisiana, Texas. You see all these heavy black dots? Can you see them black dots? Those black dots represent Jewish bank owners and founders. Now look at the dots. These heavy dots, Jewish banks. And you notice this dark spot here? That's the Mississippi Delta.
Take my hand and look at me